So we are incorporated by letters patent as Denison Street Baptist Church, right? That land was bought for £200, right? That land is our history. That's our heritage, it's our background. We've been around for ages. At the 10th anniversary of our church, we celebrated 78 scholars in our Sunday school. How about that? We had 8 teachers and 78 kids in our Sunday school. But of course, being the mid-1800s, we would call children at Sunday school scholars, right? So I'm not sure how you view your children, but when they come back, you can pat them on the back and say, I'm proud of you, my little scholar. But we had 78. At our 50th anniversary, we had 215 members in our church. 215. We had an incredible ministry. And you know, all of that started in the lounge room of a man called W.T. Buzzacott. Or H.T. W.T.? Can you remember, Dan? Can't remember now. If you'll check it, it doesn't matter. But it's Buzzacott. I always remember that name because there's saws and motors named after that name. But that's where it started. And a group of about 4 or 5 people, Baptists that used to worship at a church in Sydney that had moved to Rockhampton to live. And with that small group of people, they started to share the message of Jesus with the region known as Rockhampton. And as they shared the story of Jesus, the church grew, and it grew, and it grew. And after 50 years, they had to build a new building. And then they relocated from Denison Street to Fitzroy Street. And then this opportunity came up and we moved from Fitzroy Street to here, Glenmore Road. No, am I wrong? I missed something. What have I missed? Oh, we moved to High Street. No, that's a different church. Yes. No, I think I'm right. Yeah, I'm right. Okay. Thanks, Joan. Appreciate you keeping me on my toes. So it's been a wonderful journey. Actually, what Joan's alluding to is another church, High Street. If you actually have a look at the history records of our church, there were dozens, and I mean dozens, of church plants that came from this church. Dozens. Back in the day, think about it. Take yourself back to the mid-1800s, even earlier, when well, maybe not too far earlier, but you would travel everywhere pretty much by horse and cart, or for the most part, by foot. So as a community grew, and as people come into a region, areas would be established, but for most people, that's quite a distance, you know? And so we had churches at places like Lakes Creek. There was churches all over the place, all these Baptist churches. Rockhampton is one of the few regional cities, maybe even the only regional city, that had multiple Baptist churches scattered throughout it, right? So our presence was really, really strong. Like, we had a very, very strong presence in our community. And then in time, once everyone got to the point of mostly the automobile and commuting was a lot easier, then that was all rationalised back into, you know, larger centralised churches. It's just the way of the world and the changes that occur. And so we've gone through lots of iterations. And it's a very exciting and fascinating story. If anyone's interested, if you're a bit of a history buff, we've got a book that's printed that's just got a whole bunch of information about our history. In actual fact, if someone's a really keen history buff, it'd be really good to update it with our modern history. We've got a really established history recorded up to, I think, about the 70s, 80s, somewhere around that, maybe a little bit further. But we don't have a lot of detail after that. We'd be able to dig up the information, but we don't have it recorded. So it'd be super cool if someone's into that kind of thing. But history is really, really important. And it's often a symbol of past hopes, present experience, and future aspirations, right? When you think about your history, you think of what was, You think of how that shapes what is now, and you think about what that might look like into the future, and you could get quite excited. I remember when I first got married, I was really quite enraptured with the woman that I'd married. That was my focus. So that becomes the history of our family unit. And then we got to a point where we looked to the future and wanted to have our own family. We wanted to have children. And we now have children. And all of our children are now adults. And now I'm getting to this weird space where I feel like I'm, I don't know, aging or something. And I'm thinking, wow, maybe I'm not too far away from having grandchildren. I'm now looking at the future. I'm looking at the future and thinking, oh, that'd be kind of cool. I wouldn't mind that, actually. I'm okay with that thought, And so you go through these different stages and iterations. And one of the things that I want to suggest to you today is that irrespective of your history or your present, there always is greater hope for the future. Right? And I want to say to you today, never say never. Never give up on the opportunities that are there before you. Never give up on what God is doing in your life and in your world. I want to turn to the book of Lamentations. So if you've got a Bible or a device there, you might like to find Lamentations chapter 3 and find your way to verse 22. Lamentations is probably not the most familiar book to most Christians. A lot of people wouldn't be super familiar with the content of Lamentations. A lot of people maybe haven't even read the book through from one end to the other. A lot of people won't know the general theme of it, but most people will know this particular verse that we're going to read. Most people will have heard this. It's probably the famous verse of Lamentations. It's also a famous verse of the Scriptures. Lamentations chapter 3, and I'm going to start at verse 22. It says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, and his mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke of his youth." Some of you will actually be very, very familiar with the end part of verse 33. Great is your faithfulness. And one of the reasons, of course, that we'll be familiar with that is because there is a hymn called Great is Your Faithfulness, or Great is Thy Faithfulness. Most of us will be familiar with the classic original language of that hymn. It's an old, stately, well-established hymn. Great is your faithfulness. This is where it comes from. That comes directly out of Scripture from Lamentations chapter 3, verse 23. This is a magnificent passage. When you read it, you may or may not resonate with it as being your life experience. And I want to tease that out a little bit very quickly, because this is making a statement, an emphatic statement, a certain statement. It's saying the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Never ceases. Now, I'm proposing to you that we don't want to be in a position where we never say never, but in this context, we actually embrace the neverness of the fact that God is stable and sticks with us. We often use never in a sense of God's never going to forgive me, or I'm never going to get my broken past back, or things are never going to improve. We use never in our cultural context, particularly as Aussies who tend to be pessimistic. We tend to cut down the tall poppies. We tend to see the negative side of things. Our humour is generally cynical. That's Australian way. We use never in a negative tense, right? Generally as Australians. So we use never for quite a lot of reasons, but I want to suggest to you today that we should never say never. Let's stop using never in that negative sense. Because when God uses the word never, he uses it in a positive sense. God's faithfulness, his steadfast love will never end. So we want to apply never in a completely different context, completely different way. If you've studied this passage, and a lot of people will have, you'll know that this is a really weak, limp passage in English. And the reason being is that the word that's used in the original language, in Hebrew, is a much more powerful word, a much richer, more diverse, all-encompassing word. And we don't have an English equivalent. The word is hesed. Now, I don't know how to pronounce that. Knowing the Jews, they'd probably do this hacky thing, like, look, what? But hesed is a word that encompasses the idea of not just God being loving or faithful, but being loyal, being committed. This is a concept that portrays God as being locked into his people, deeply connected. This is a word that is so profound and so significant that you can embrace it and be absolutely confident that irrespective of your situations or your circumstances, God will stay with you. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. See the benefit of that? See the way that God uses the word never? He uses the word never as a statement of his determination to never, ever let go of you, to never give up on you. Right? God's desire is to embrace you and to draw you into his world and into his kingdom. He wants to touch you. He wants to transform you. And never will he let Satan snatch you out of his hands. Never, in a biblical sense, is powerful. Powerful. In an Australian sense, it is miserable. Let's not be Aussies. Let's be Christians. Let's not get caught up in the negativity of our culture, the misery and the pessimism of local news. Let's not get caught in the stories that tabloids circulate over and over. Let's not get caught up in social media fake news. Let's not get caught up in the narrative of our own family or our own friends or our own work colleagues when that is negative and pessimistic and contrary to the purposes of God. Let's not get caught up in dim, dark places when we're feeling depressed and anxious and overwhelmed. Let's not get caught up in those things that they become the things that define us. No, let's redefine this word. Let's re-embrace never and apply it to the way that God talks about never. God talks about never in no uncertain terms. Never ceases, never comes to an end. That's my experience. And I would argue that's your experience. The thing is that we don't always see the experience. That's the challenge. What we don't always realize is that even in the midst of the most distressing and difficult times of life, the darkest parts of your history, the darkest moments in your mind, the biggest disappointments, the greatest challenges or obstacles, it doesn't matter what your barrier is. Never always applies in God's economy. It never comes to an end. Never ceases. Right? So God is your never friend. Right? Think about it. He's your never friend. Not as in never there, but as in never gives up. God is never going to let you go. God is never going to stop investing into you. God is never going to turn his back on you. right? This is magnificent, powerful stuff. And this is the story that we look to the future with, right? As Rockhampton Baptist Church, we look to the future with this idea that God will never abandon his people. My dream, my desire, my longing is to actually be a part of what God is doing in such a way that we would see this auditorium full of people that are hungry for Jesus. Is anyone interested in smiling? Like, seriously. Like, this is the stuff that counts. This is the stuff that matters, right? God will never give up on his church. He is going to build his church, and we are a part of that church. And he is doing incredible stuff at the moment. He is transforming the world. I want to share with you a couple of things that are just going on, because you may or may not be aware of this. But we have a number of people in our church who God has touched in one way or another and drawn them into our church. I've got a handful of names in my head. People who are a part of our church, who worship in our church, who are active in the ministries of our church, who within the last 12 months have just turned up here. Not because anyone in our church has reached out to them and said, hey, can I tell you about Jesus? Come along. But because the Spirit of God has touched their lives and drawn them into our church. That's nuts, right? I've got a friend here, Caitlin, fairly new friend. Where are you, Caitlin? Caitlin, there's Caitlin. Hello, Caitlin. Caitlin turned up a couple of weeks after Easter. She walked in, had a Bible, and she said, I've just become a Christian. Like, this was a new experience. I remember the nervousness that you showed, Caitlin. You were like nervous. Caitlin is now actively involved in our worshiping community. She's involved in a life group. She's brought a friend or friends along to things that we've done. She's done Alpha with us, and God is transforming her life. Right? I asked Caitlin if I could mention her. I said I wouldn't talk about her, but I did actually, sorry. But God's working in Caitlin's life. And there's a number of other people in our church, same story. God has worked in their heart and just drawn them in. Praise the Lord, eh? But you know what else? Here's the thing. This is going on right throughout our city. There are other churches experiencing the same thing. And get this, it's going on right throughout our state, right? God will never give up on his church. There are people walking into churches all around Queensland. No one has told them about Jesus. They don't even know a Christian. They have somehow or other encountered something. Reading scripture, searching online, or just a powerful work of the Spirit, whatever it is, and they've just been drawn into a church community, a Christian community. And get this, it's not just Queensland. I know this is God's own country, but it's right throughout our nation. There are people in every state in Australia that are just walking into churches. Isn't that magnificent? But you know what? Get this. It's not only Australia. Apparently, God's interested in the rest of the world too. What's going on is people are just being drawn into the kingdom of God. There's a phrase that's being coined called the quiet revival. The quiet revival. It's like God is bringing about revival. No Billy Graham crusades. No hippie revolution. Nothing particular outstanding. Nothing super high profile. God is just drawing people to him. He will never give up on his mission. Never. God doesn't use that word in a defeatist posture. God only uses the word never in the context of resolution. Ah, there you go. There's a bird. God uses the word never in a positive sense. God uses the word never to indicate to you that he will never give up on you. And God is so certain and so determined and so focused on what he's trying to achieve that he wants to draw you into his world and into his kingdom. And God will never, ever give up on you. Let me read these verses again. I want you to just listen to this and let this sink in. Just take a moment to quietly reflect on this. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. Is that your story? Is that your story? Right? Because that's the reality. God is drawing people to him. And the bizarre thing is, those that I'm talking to that are starting to be touched by God, they don't even realize how or why. They don't even realize what's going on. They're just drawn. They're just drawn. Just drawn. Never say never. In the book of Mark, we read a magnificent story of a woman who was just in a crowd following Jesus. Jesus had lots of people following him. There was a lot of reason to follow Jesus. You know, he was clearly an outstanding leader. He was a great teacher. He was incredibly sensitive, pastoral, really nice guy. He was a strong leader, no doubt. He was a miracle worker. He did some pretty specky stuff. It was just like almost entertaining, turning water into wine and doing all sorts of crazy things. But then really genuine, compassionate things, healing people who were sick, giving people direction and guidance and solving problems, bringing solutions into the lives of broken people. There was reason why people followed Jesus, because he never ignored anyone. Never ignored anyone. And one day he's walking down the road with a throng of people around him. People are pressing in, trying to get a piece of Jesus, trying to experience him. And in that crowd, there is a woman who is described as having an issue of bleeding for 12 years. It's like a perpetual menstrual cycle. Her rhythm wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. The inconvenience of that is profound. We probably never really understand it. This is an era before the blessings of sanitary pads or anything like that. This is an era when you're talking about people who were isolated from the whole of society when they had that kind of medical problem. Religiously, spiritually, she was considered unclean, right? So she couldn't actually mix with the worshiping community. Think about it. Think about having a health issue where you couldn't even come to church or mix with the worshiping community because you were unclean. You were unacceptable spiritually, unable to get close to God. She wouldn't have been able to work or provide for herself. There's a whole bunch of problems in terms of how she would even survive in society. Her basic and fundamental needs were at risk. This issue was not mere inconvenience. This issue was powerfully impacting her very ability to actually live life, to just be a person. And in her desperation, she reasons in her mind, if only I could just touch Jesus' garment, right? This is where her mind is. She's thinking, man, this guy is crazy powerful. I think even if I just touched his shirt, even if I just touched something that he's wearing, that would be enough. If I could just get that close, if I could just have that connection, I would be healed. And so in her desperation, in the difficulties of her condition, she mixes in with that crowd and she fights her way somehow to the front. Now, I don't think that would have been an easy task either, if you think about it. Generally speaking, women were pushed to the back. She wouldn't have been the strongest of people. Huge number of people want to be in there. Not only would have been people been trying to push her out of the way so that they could get in closer, but they would have also recognised that she shouldn't, socially, she didn't have the right. But somehow or other, she fought. Her tenacity, her determination, her passion, her desire, her deep-seated need drove her to seek out Jesus. And she comes in and she gets close enough to Jesus that she's able to achieve the very thing that she's imagining she could achieve, and she touches Jesus' cloak. And the scriptures tell us that instantly she was healed. Instantly. She knew it. Instantly she was healed. It's like, oh my goodness. It stopped. I'm freed. Oh no, it's really happened. And remarkably, not only does she have this moment of sudden instant realization, but Jesus too. He felt the power go out from him. It's a fascinating story. She touches his cloak and he feels power come out of him. That's crazy stuff. And she is healed, and Jesus is aware that something's happened. So he stops and he says, "Who touched me?" Now, for all of those really close to him, they're thinking, "I know that you have some radical ways, but mate, this is loopy. You see the crowd? Like, how can you even ask such a question? There's no way of telling who touched you. We're all touching you. Like, we're just banging up against you all the time." No, that wasn't good enough. Jesus was not going to accept that answer. Jesus wanted the deeper, the more profound, the powerful answer. Jesus wanted to know who, literally who touched him. And the woman, it says in the scriptures, trembling. She was afraid. Knowing what had happened to her, it says, comes before Jesus. And she tells him the whole story. Jesus healed a woman almost unintentionally. Why? Because she longed to have an encounter with Jesus. She longed to have an encounter with Jesus. I want to ask you a similar question, because that's what really matters. I want you to be thinking, what are you looking for? Are you wanting to have an encounter with Jesus? Right? Because here's the problem. Sometimes what's going on in our spirituality is dry and empty, maybe even shallow. Our growth is minimal at best, or maybe we're even regressing. Sometimes our Christian life and practice and our passion for those that are going to a Christless eternity doesn't really matter to us. It's not driving our hearts a great deal. Why? Because we're really not that desperate ourselves. I want to just pause and read back early in chapter 3 of Lamentations. Listen to this. This is the context of the verses that we're focusing on. I am the man who has seen affliction under the rod of his wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Surely against me he turns his hand again and again the whole day long. He has made my flesh and my skin waste away. He has broken my bones. He has besieged and enveloped me with bitterness and tribulation. He has made me dwell in darkness like the dead of long ago. He has walled me about so that I cannot escape. He has made my chains heavy. Though I call and cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my ways with blocks of stones. He has made my path crooked. He is a bear lying in wait for me, a lion in hiding. He turned aside my steps and tore me into pieces. He has made me desolate. He bent his bow and set me as a target for his arrow. He drove into my kidneys the arrows of his quiver. I have become the laughing stock of all peoples, the object of their taunts all day long. He has filled me with bitterness. He has sated me with wormwood. He has made my teeth grind on gravel and made me cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is, so I say, my endurance is perished. He's saying never. He's a bit Aussie here. So has my hope from the Lord. That's pretty miserable, isn't it? And it's interesting that the writer of Lamentations is attributing all of that misery to the hand of God. All of that trouble, all of that suffering, all of that heartache, all of that brokenness, he's attributing it to the hand of God. He's recognizing that God is divine, all-powerful and sovereign. God can do whatever he likes, and God has given me a bad lot. My life sucks. And you may well identify with that, because that's not an abnormal story for any human being. But it's against that backdrop that we read, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, and his mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. Steadfast love of the Lord, the hesed of the Lord never ceases. When God uses the word never, when he's looking at your life, he uses it with a positive disposition. He uses it to say he will never let up on you. And he will never let up on the world that we live in. And he is currently doing a mighty work and drawing people into his kingdom. And the question is, will you be a part of that? The staff team and some of the others in our church have just come back from the Baptist World Congress. We're in the Brisbane Exhibition Centre, South Bank, worshipping with more than 3,000 people from cultures all around the world. And Elijah Brown, who's the kind of CEO guy of Baptist World Alliance, spoke on the first night. And he drew our attention to the fact that in 2033, it will be the 2000th anniversary since the death and resurrection of Jesus. And being 2,000 years as a round number after Jesus' death and resurrection, that's a good number. That's a good date. That's a good time to set ourselves some goals. And so he put to us a proposal that by 2033, that Baptists around the world reach 1 billion people, 1 billion people with the story of Jesus. And I thought, ooh, okay. Then he broke it down. And this gravitated, or resonated, that's the right word. This resonated with my soul so deeply because I realized two things. One is God is already doing a powerful work in the world. He is doing stuff. We're just seeing people discover Jesus just because the Spirit of God is working. But I also realized how achievable 1 billion people is. If every single Baptist in the world shared their story and encounter with Jesus with another person just 3 times a year, 3 times a year, we would share the story of Jesus with 1 billion people by 2033. Does that inspire you? I'm not convinced, but I'm kind of captivated by that. I'm thinking, that's actually very achievable. All I got to do is just tell people what Jesus has done in my life. Right? Some of you will go into deeper detail, some of you won't, some of you will be able to answer questions or objections. But if we tell people about Jesus, that will further capitulate and expand and empower what God is already doing by His Spirit. He's drawing people into His kingdom. Right? We're seeing it even in our own church. People are just coming to faith. People are interested. Stats tell us that more than 50% of the new generation of young people are interested in having spiritual conversations. Right? We may be post-modern or post-Christendom. We may be past the era when just about everyone knows about Christianity, but we are now in a new era where a whole generation of people that are completely in the dark are interested. And I'm excited that this week, our new youth pastor starts. This week. Like, come on, be excited. This week we begin a new path. This week we begin investing into actively, proactively, deliberately, decidedly taking the message of Jesus to the new generation that is interested in Him. But you know what's really spectacular? Is that in churches right around our nation, people of all ages and generations are coming to faith and getting baptized. God's not just choosing one generation. And so today I want to pose this question. Where are you at the moment? Where's your faith? Where's your life? Where are you going? What are you looking for? Turn to Jesus. Turn to Jesus. God's faithfulness is never ending. His mercies will never come to an end. Great is His faithfulness. He will never give up on you. That's His cause. He will never give up on His cause. His mission is rock solid. And so this morning, as we wrap up and as we get ready to go out and celebrate, share together and eat food and talk and love each other, I want you at this moment to think about how you might respond. What are you looking for?